It began similarly to past WNBA games. The lights, the energy, and the eagerly buzzing audience. However, Sophie Cunningham was unaware that she was about to start a firestorm when she entered that court. Went beyond a comrade standing up for a teammate. The WNBA's most meticulously crafted falsehood started to fall apart in front of millions of people at this very moment. The league has been promoting the neat little story that Caitlin Clark was just experiencing typical rookie hazing. The typical hiccups and bruises of entering into professional athletics, nothing to see here. Sophie, however, completely destroyed that fairy story. Fans have been yelling into thin air for weeks. Why is Clark being struck in this manner? Why do referees ignore their concerns? Most damning of all, why is no one speaking up? The quiet was overwhelming. That is, until Sophie Cunningham, whose name was previously little recognized outside of her squad, took a stand and yelled the truth. She didn't skirt the issue. She made no request for authorization. She described it as systematic targeting, envy posing as competition, and a lead that was too afraid or complicit to put an end to it. There was nothing conspiratorial about this. It was time to face up. This was unexpected by the WNBA, not from someone they called a role player, and not from Sophie. However, they were unaware that role players keep an eye on everything. In those locker rooms, they can hear everything. Every uncalled foul is seen by them, and they are considerably more familiar with the league's climate than the suit-clad executives. Sophie had nothing to lose. She had names and invoices. She also transformed the debate in the basketball world in a single, dramatic moment. However, neither a news conference nor a PR campaign with a script created that moment. Anger gave birth to it. Watching gave birth to it. The league gasses audiences with rhetoric about learning curves and aggressive play as they watch a young rookie take cheap shots, game after game. Sophie had been suppressing it until she was unable to do so any longer. It wasn't just one foul, however, when she finally broke, in contrast to a culture of quiet, it was a declaration of war. This is the beginning of a revolution, not with think pieces or hashtags, but with a single player declaring, "I've had enough." Sophie Cunningham was the player in question, and the league was never the same after that. You must realize that the pivotal event did not occur in a news story. The choice was made in an instant. Sophie herself described it as an intrusive idea. Throughout the game, Caitlin Clark had been pushed, slammed, and poked. This was no longer basketball. There was a message from a lead who was determined to crush her. It's possible that not every shove or punch was captured by the cameras. However, Sophie and the crowd both sensed it. There was more to the Connecticut Sun game than simply a game. It was the culmination of a trend that fans had been seeing for some months. Clark was obviously disturbed, hurting physically, and exhausted emotionally. And the referees did nothing at all. Take a moment to process it. Nothing. There were no blatant cries or warnings, just quiet. As if the assault was a part of the performance. Sophie, however, felt that the quiet was more powerful than any sound, and she took action then. She didn't just hard foul. It was clean, it was intentional. Justice was served. The fine didn't matter to her. The expulsion didn't bother her. One thing mattered to her: conveying the idea that someone else will defend Caitlin Clark if the league does not. The badge of honor was her $900 fine. A prize for speaking out at last in a league that incentivizes quiet. And the immediate and seismic fallout. Millions of new fans. Sales of jerseys are skyrocketing. A podcast agreement with the network of Colin Coward. However, this was not a pursuit of celebrity. It was a moment of culture. The supporters' cheers weren't limited to foul. The truth had finally been said out loud. They were cheering it on. Sophie was no longer only a player. All of a sudden, she served as a metaphor, a sign of bravery, rebellion, and getting up while everyone else sat down. Everything changed at that instant. For the WNBA as a whole, Not just for Clark or Fever.va, came the portion that the league was unable to ignore. Sophie's offense to Clark wasn't the only one. She revealed the reason. Behind the veil is the rot. The discussions that were never intended for spectators to hear in locker rooms. This was not a single squad. This was a systematic issue. Teams were really strategizing ways to make Caitlin Clark more resilient. Strategies were whispered at pre-game discussions. Players with a lot of experience who were upset. Everyone working together to degrade the league's most talented player. Consider that. This was not game-related trash talk. It wasn't impromptu, rough play. This was a planned action. Sophie gave names. Her previous teammates were the Phoenix Mercury. They were playing target, not just being rough. And even before Caitlin Clark made her first jump shot in the league, they had been after her. Hazing isn't that. That is animosity. The league's unease was palpable. They weren't hearsay. They were receipts. No unnamed sources. Don't speculate. Sophie said it simply. I am aware of the Phoenix discussions. They replied, now we're going to prove her. We will demonstrate to her the true nature of the W folklore. That is, intent is that. And it ought to infuriate every fan. The worst thing is that Sophie wasn't speculating. She was present. She could really hear it. From inside, she saw things unfold. Because of this, her statements are not only strong, but also indisputable. It wasn't simply a player that voiced their opinion. Under the league's most explosive secret, this whistleblower lit the match. The league sought to promote growth, sisterhood, and harmony. Sophie, however, exposed insecurity, envy, and treachery disguised as tradition, and there was no turning back once she opened her lips. And then there was the arithmetic, the unavoidable, nasty math. This year, Caitlin Clark is producing more than $1 billion in lead value. That is projection, not exaggeration. And she was paid a ridiculous $78,766. That's less than what some individuals pay on an old pickup vehicle. For comparison, take a moment to process it. A 5-figure deal for $1 billion engine. This is where things get worse. However, these are the same clubs that benefit from Clark's notoriety. The same people who pay sponsorship checks, sell out venues, and celebrate TV numbers are also planning ways to bring her down. That's not simply hypocrisy. That's stealing. The first person to speak it out was Sophie. You're profiting off her. If you're clever, who receives the credit doesn't matter. She is correct. The league needs to support Clark, shield her, and encourage her. Instead, they stood by and watched as she was body-checked, humiliated, and dismissed. Why? Because who was in the limelight was too much for the league's ego to handle. Sophie, however, did not recoil. Every executive was too afraid to acknowledge what she stated. We have always desired this. More significance, more admirers, and more eyes. However, the league gave sabotage and quiet when it came time to recognize the lady who was behind it all. It was no coincidence that there was stillness. It was calculated. At the cost of the very celebrity they are making money off of. It was self-preservation. Sophie took it a step further. She demolished the misconception that Caitlin Clark isn't the league's spokesperson. When naysayers dare to imply she's not the one, Sophie loses it. Who would it be? She inquired. Ionescu, Sabrina. Excellent player, yes. However, the leads. Sophie didn't undermine other people. She just said the truth. No one else is addressing this fact, which is supported by sold-out audiences, rising ratings, and jersey numbers. Sophie not only disagreed with those who attempted to minimize Clark's influence, but she also swore at them. You're dumb if you think the league would be where it is without her, she said. Nor incorrect, nor misguided. Foolish. There was no rudeness in the tone. It was truthful. And the fan base had been hankering for such honesty. There is no trend in Clark's presence. There has been a change. Additionally, any team that is making money off of her ought to start behaving as if they really deserve her. This isn't about hero worship, Sophie made plain. Respect is at issue. Since Clark first set foot on a WNBA floor, there has been a conspicuous lack of respect. Sophie didn't only state her argument. She challenged the other players in the league to disprove her, and nobody has, as of yet. Then the referees, the last nail in the coffin of the story, appeared. Fans have been criticizing the officiating for months, but until Sophie spoke out, no one in the league would admit it. It's precisely what she called it. Quite simply, bias. Anyone else would be ejected from Caitlin Clark's hits. But nothing. For her, no whistles, no calls, just body after body colliding with her with no repercussions. And Sophie explained it in simple terms. The referee swallowed their whistles as if nothing had happened, as the opponents grabbed her, shoved her, after the balls were gone, and blasted through screens with reckless force. The worst part is still to come. Sophie didn't complain. She wasn't making assumptions. She was contrasting that with how she was treated. If I made those plays, I'd be ejected, she said. But it isn't a double standard, is that? The league has even refused to recognize it. Sophie's remarks, however, set the internet on fire. Every replay, every bad call, and every time Clark struck the ground was analyzed by fans. The league was suddenly unable to use plausible deniability as a defense. There were trends. The proof was openly available, and the quiet at the top was more audible than before. Fans noticed more than just prejudice when Sophie revealed the truth. It was treachery. Treachery at the expense of stars by a league that professes to support it. It may be everything. Then the word that made all the difference arrived. Caitlin Clark looked Sophie in the eyes and spoke a single phrase after her foul, expulsion, and commotion. At last. That's all. At last. And the agony of a whole season poured forth in just one syllable. Clark had been holding out hope that someone, anybody, would defend her. She didn't need an address. An apology wasn't necessary for her. She needed a teammate who would fight for her, and she discovered that fighter in Sophie Cunningham. In answer, Sophie said, "I got you." And the Indiana Fever altered after that. They were no longer just a team, they were one. One who refused to allow its star to be punished for blazing too brightly. Sophie did more than keep Clark safe. She gave her emotional validation, and it's uncommon to get affirmation like that. It's strong, it transforms everything. Sophie has been the first to intervene when things go physical ever since Sophie Cunningham's stand wasn't just about one player, it became a movement. Fans saw the missed calls, the injuries, and the silence from the league after serious concerns were raised. Instead of investigating or addressing the issues, Sophie was fined, and the conversation stopped. But supporters didn't. Social media united, voices grew louder, and other players began to speak up. What started as one moment of defiance became a rallying cry against unfair treatment in the game. Now, all eyes are on the league, and Sophie isn't backing down.